So it's my pleasure today. Well, first I should say welcome to the Ranchers Thursday Lunchtime series. This is the first session in a series devoted to heifer selection, development, and breeding. And we're really excited about the lineup of speakers that we were able to acquire or join us, agree to join us on the series here. And today you're going to get to enjoy one of an industry icon, in my view, Mr. Burke Teichert. Just a little bit about Burke's background, and I don't know all the details. Burke, you're welcome to share any further background as you get started here. But most of you will probably recognize him from his writings in Beef Magazine. My understanding is that maybe that effort is sunset. Maybe you're going to have maybe a couple of more of those published, but then maybe that's going to be discontinued. So we're just thrilled to have Burke join us today to talk about his philosophy in terms of creating an efficient cow herd. Now, just so you know, Burke is a person that has tremendous experience. Okay, he has managed ranches in Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, Utah. No, I'm probably forgetting one or two states, and many of those ranches he managed consecutively or at the same time. And I know when I first arrived in Oklahoma, he contacted the university here and asked for someone to come to visit. The company here was at that point in time, or that division of his company was Sooner Land and Cattle Company. And so I enjoyed a visit up there. I got to know Burke a little bit, and I can tell you the education began when I sat in beside him in the truck that day, and I've been learning from Burke Teichert ever since. So we are thrilled to have you. Looking forward to your comments, Burke.
Well, it looks like we're ready to go.
Looks and sounds good.
Okay. If questions come in during the course of this, there'll be 2 or 3 places I'll try to remember to stop and take questions that might come in addition to at the end.
Okay, that sounds good.
But it's a pleasure for me to be with you all today and to visit about something that to me is very important. And the title that I was given was Heifer Selection for Improved Lifetime Productivity. I'm probably going to take a few liberties with that subject because I like to think that over the years I've become a systems thinker. And there's so much interconnectedness between all of our activities and everything we do that when you do something like selecting replacement heifers, you don't do it in isolation from other things, or if you do, you're probably going to get yourself into some trouble. So I want to ask just a few questions here as we go. Heifer selection for improved lifetime productivity, and then from that we might say, well, are we selecting for a cow herd or for individual heifers? And then we might further ask, is it the heifer's lifetime productivity, or is it the cow herd's annual or long-term profitability? Do we want profitability first and drive as much of that through productivity as we can? Are we looking at individuals or are we looking at herds? Why so much emphasis on heifer pregnancy? And do you want it to be fed in or bred in? And I've contended for quite some time that our estimates for the heritability of fertility are lower than it really is. I think the heritability is higher. And I think the reason that is because most of those estimates have been taken at places where the animals are fed very well. And so pregnancy rates can be pretty good when you feed pretty good. But if you start to take, can I call them crutches? You start to take crutches away, and then the fertility bounces around a little more. And I don't know for sure that it's more highly heritable, but it seems to me that it relates closely to body condition, which is quite heritable, and to age at puberty, which is quite heritable. So quite a number of things there that would make me wonder. But we have this emphasis on heifer pregnancy because we get the impression that it costs a lot of money to develop a heifer. And I want to suggest there's another way to develop heifers, and we'll get to those as we go along, so that you don't have to look at heifer development as a big expense. You might, in fact, look at it as a wonderful profit opportunity, and not by selling bred heifers, but by selling those that are open. So are we after whole ranch profit, or are we seeking bragging rights? In other words, we want to have the biggest and best, prettiest heifers, or would we like our whole ranch to be profitable? Cow calf enterprise stockers, if we have them, or if we run our own calves over to yearlings as stockers. I hope it's a profitable operation that we're really seeking for. So we can ask the question, is it productivity or profitability? And I'm going to suggest that it's both. We would like to have both because I think profitability to some extent is driven by productivity. Okay, heifer selection for productivity and profitability of your future cow herd. And that's kind of what we're after here. Now, while we're thinking about heifers, selection and development, we need to remember that when we think about that, we're usually thinking about production. Well, let's not forget economics and finance, marketing, and people. We manage all of those, and we must tie them together in this quest for a better cow herd that begins with heifer development, heifer selection. There are 3 ways to improve profit in a ranching operation. You can increase turnover. In other words, that's have more units to sell. You can decrease overheads. And by the way, on most ranches where I've done consulting work, the overheads are the low-hanging fruit. People just have a lot more stuff than they need: equipment, buildings, facilities, etc. And we learned to love those nice fancy pickups and the big stock trailers and our favorite tractor and 4-wheelers and side-by-sides, and they're all nice, and some of them are necessary. But the ranchers that make progress in profitability usually trim a lot of those overheads and get down to just what they need instead of what they might want. And then we can improve gross margin. And gross margin is total returns minus direct costs. And direct costs are those that change every time you change the number of cows. So it's basically feed and vet-related costs, vet medicines and vet services. And there's some marketing costs and a few other minor costs, but that's basically what gross margin is the total returns minus those direct costs. The rest of the costs are overheads. Overheads are people and their tools, land, and the things attached to land. So it's profit per acre, which really is whole ranch profit that we strive to improve. We got to forget about production or even profit per cow. And almost everything you see written focuses on profit per cow or production per cow. That can be misleading in terms of whole ranch profitability. If, for example, to improve production per cow or maybe profit per cow, you've let those cows get bigger and bigger. And as they get bigger and bigger, you have to run fewer and fewer of them on the same resource. And yes, those bigger cows will wean a bigger calf, but not proportionally bigger. And most research would show not even close to proportionally bigger. And so the smaller cow weaning a slightly smaller calf will have a calf that you sell more total pounds on the ranch, and you sell them for a higher price per pound. So we've got to be real careful when we push on production and profit per cow and look at profit per acre or whole ranch profit. And that will keep us out of a lot of trouble. This is a list of some major determinants of profit. Our enterprise mix and choices is really important. Are we a cow-calf operation raising our own replacement heifers? Or are we just a cow-calf operation buying replacement cows? Those two things can make a lot of difference, and I might suggest that a lot of ranchers should be buying replacement cows. And the comment I get back to me when I make that observation is that I can't find any good cows. Hey, if they can walk and are pregnant and are healthy, they're good enough. You'll make more money terminal crossing just cows, than you will raising your own replacements in a high percent of the time. And I've got all kinds of information to prove that, a lot of experience to prove that. On the ranches that I managed, our terminal cross ranches made more money than our other ranches, unless the other ranches were producing replacement cows, not heifers, replacement cows. And you could mark those cows up to a premium price, which is what we did between some of our ranches. And then with a premium price on the replacement cow, the ranch that was selling the cows could then compete with the terminal cross ranches, but the terminal cross ranches found that depreciation they had to take between that premium price and their final market price, cull price for that cow, was still a cheap substitute for heifer development costs. Now, we hope these cows were better than just cows, but that worked. So your enterprise mix, stockers, cow-calf, cow-yearling, very important. Overheads, and I just talked about overheads. The more you can reduce them, the better. Stocking rate. Stocking rate's a huge driver of profitability, and is determined by two major categories: cow size and milk production. Dr. Lallman's talked about that in the past. I've heard him. He also adds muscle in there as a problem sometimes. Grazing and pasture management. If you can double stocking rate, think of what you do to a whole bunch of other costs, and we'll have a little discussion about that in a few minutes. Then fed feed versus grazed feed. I'll say it this way: anytime you put a machine between the mouth of the cow and her feed source, it costs you money. So we want to reduce fed feed, increase grazed feed. And I hope we'll show how that has an impact on heifer development and heifer selection. Calving season. I could say more about that, but very important economically. Realized herd fertility. When I say realized herd fertility, I'm talking about an animal that's conceived, born, and lives long enough to be sold. Wise input for optimum production. In other words, if I'm going to buy a feed supplement, I want to know that the use of that feed supplement will bring back more than its costs. And I like it to bring back significantly more, or think it will, just because I might not estimate correctly. And then marketing. The better job we do of marketing, the better. But those are major determinants of profit. Hope you notice I didn't put weaning weight anyplace in here. Increased weaning weight has a cost, and oftentimes we just figure it's the feed cost. But no, it's not just the feed cost. Usually as cows get bigger, fertility goes down, stocking rate diminishes. Those are costs that are harder to quantify, but they're real costs. And with some effort, you can quantify them too, but they don't just come to the top of your head quickly. So to summarize what I've just sort of said, to put it in a nutshell, profitable ranch management can be pretty much summarized by this slide. Reduce overheads, market well, and then improve three key ratios: acres per cow, cows per FTE. That's full-time equivalent in labor. So if you're a small ranch, you've got a day job, how many cows can you run for the amount of time, a percentage of full time that you spend on that place? Fed feed versus grazed feed. And these ratios are just powerful economic ratios. And if you can be improving those all the time, you'll be improving your profitability. So for profitable decision making, and in this case, selecting replacement heifers, become a systems thinker. Learn how to take the factors I've just mentioned into consideration as you begin to make decisions about cow herd replacements. And sometimes they should be somebody else's cows and they develop the heifers. Sometimes you develop the heifers yourself, but we'd like that heifer development to really be economically wise. And to do that, we need to become a systems thinker or think holistically. We need to think of as many of the related things as we can to make sure we don't stub our toe and do something that takes us backward rather than forward. Now, you wonder probably why I have adaptive grazing in here. And let's just follow me just for a minute and I'll try to show you why. Adaptive grazing is a very powerful tool. It's comprised of short graze periods followed by lengthy recovery periods. And that's different places, different situations, and that's why we call it adaptive. When you do that, you have to have a lot of paddocks. If you do it right, it will increase carrying capacity, which will lead to a greater stocking rate and gives you better animal performance. Now, if you do it wrong, it won't do these things, but if you do it right, it'll do these things. Now, this is a ranch in southeast Montana. And over the years with adaptive grazing, they have doubled their stocking rate from 30 to about 16, and they tell us 30 acres per cow to 16 acres per cow. And they tell me that they have, in the process of that time, that they have, that the cows have gotten bigger. So he knows he's doubled the stocking rate from 30 acres per cow to 16 acres per cow. And they have not added a man, they have not added a tractor, they have not added a saddle horse, they have not added a pickup. The only cost, and so what's happened to overhead cost per cow? They've been cut in half. Now, I could tell more story here than I'm going to about what's happened there, but all that cut the overheads in half. But do you think the same cows deal with grazing year round in southeast Montana, being fed very little hay, only in the worst of conditions, and grazing in tighter mobs, tighter groups? Do you think the same cow deals well with that as deals well with in a situation where the cow's pretty much fed through the winter, where the grazing is totally different, more conventional type grazing where cattle are turned out in large pastures and left for lengthy periods of time? No, it takes a different kind of cow to deal with it. These are cows in Missouri. This is April, by the way, no leaves on the trees, and see how tall the grass is? None of the neighbors had grass that tall. These cows, though, are adapted. Those black cows, they might stand in the water in the heat of summer, but the others don't. Their conception rates are wonderful. Their ability to adapt to fescue is wonderful. And just some interesting things have happened. This guy in Mississippi, he was chasing big and better and high carcass values and all that sort of thing. And he was actually not winning prizes, but he was owning his cattle clear to the carcass, clear to the rail, and getting very, very nice carcasses. But ranch profitability was going backward. Cows were becoming less and less fertile. Cow size was getting bigger, weaning fewer pounds of calf on his ranch than he had with smaller cows. And so things weren't just going right. And so he's totally changed and revamped the way he produces heifers anymore. Changed breed makeup even a little bit to do that. I'll just let that one go by. Anyway, so we're talking about selecting heifers so that we can have continuous improvement of our livestock. And I'd say it begins with cows selected for what you're seeing there. If you live in southeast or northeast Utah, this is about 50 miles from where I was born and raised, same river bottom, river valley. But anyway, you've got cows out there grazing this stuff. Now, notice if you can, if the photo's clear enough, the body condition on these cows. Now, do you think it's any kind of cow that can deal with this? I would suggest no. So that has an impact on what you're doing in your heifer development and heifer selection to replace this cow herd so that they'll fit in this environment. By asking those cows to graze that, and I can almost call it junk, to get them to graze that takes a special kind of cow and some training, but they will graze it and they will do pretty well. Now, we cheat a little bit. We feed them a little bit of alfalfa hay as a protein supplement, not very much, maybe the equivalent, someplace between 3 and 5 pounds per head per day. And we only feed it 3 times a week. So they get more than 3 to 5 every time we go, because we give them what we want them to have each day, multiply it by 7, divide by 3 times that we go, and that's what we feed them each time we go. If you do it that way, they won't be waiting for you at the gate tomorrow morning, I'll guarantee. They won't start to gather until they hear the feed outfit. So be kind to them. Don't drive by with the feed outfit on the day you're not going to feed them, because they'll just stay out and graze as long as they don't hear the feed outfit, because they don't know for sure when you're coming again or if you're coming again. But they'll maintain body condition doing that, and they'll eat that stuff. So I'm saying match cow size and calving season to your available resources. And that's the cow size and calving season is connected to the list of things below there, and inseparably connected. They affect each other and vice versa. But those things all become important to ranch profitability as you move forward. And these cows, if they're selected right, and your calving season is right. Now, if I were asking these cows, I don't know if this picture was taken in January or February, but probably one of those 2 months. If we were asking these cows to calve in February, do you think we could feed them like this? The answer to that question hopefully is an obvious no. You couldn't feed them like that. So the calving season matters in the economics of this. The cows adapted to the environment, that matters to this. And so the way you select and develop heifers all plays into that. So change the calving season to be more closely in sync with nature. Increase grazing days and reduce feeding days. Now, when we do that, we're helping ourselves make money, but we have to have adaptability. And that starts to come with the way we develop and select heifers. Dr. Lallman, have any questions come in so far?
No, sir. No questions right now.
Okay. We'll just keep on moving then. So I like to talk about minimal development of replacement heifers. And by minimal, I don't mean starve them, but I sure don't mean to get them to 65% of expected mature cow body weight. We were typically breeding, this is a picture in Nebraska, and those calves are on a cake row. And so they were getting about 3 pounds of a 15 to 18% protein product. They were fed hay when the snow demanded that they be fed hay. And sometimes the temperature. It was just really cold, or we had to, once in a while we'd get a blow that would last a week. And when that would happen, we would feed them. Had to be careful where we fed them, because when you'd get those bad windstorms that last a long time, they'd find a somewhat sheltered spot and they wouldn't leave there. You had to drop the hay on their toes or they wouldn't eat it. But at any rate, they were probably lucky to make 55% of expected mature cow weight at the start of our breeding season. But we got decent rates of pregnancy in them, depending on the length of our breeding season. And when our breeding seasons were longer, they would breed in the 80s, developed like this, in the 80, someplace between 80 and 90%. When we shortened the breeding season down, that dropped us to in the low 70s at first, but then that started little by little come back up. But minimal development of the replacement heifers. In other words, we're asking these heifers to fit the environment. And the ones that don't get pregnant, when they're developed like this, they're profitable. They're just another stalker. They're just another stalker. And stalkers are usually more profitable than cows and calves. Yearlings are usually more profitable than cows and calves. The only difference in cost in these heifers and a stalker is that we put bulls with them. Or in some cases, they eyed them, but we had those costs were the only costs that were different. And so it really truly was minimal development of replacement heifers. Now, so you've reduced inputs and then you cull the right cow. We want to cull all the opens, all the dries. And I know there's still some people that confuse these two words. Open means she did not have a calf in her when you palpated her or when you ultrasounded her for pregnancy diagnosis. Dry means that you thought she was pregnant. Now, somewhere she either aborted or lost a calf. And so she's not giving milk now because she doesn't have a calf inside, so she's dry. And we want to get rid of both of those. The animals require attention or individual help. If I have to pull a calf from a cow, I want to cull that cow. If I have to doctor the calf, I want to cull that cow. Now I got to admit, I didn't get them all, but we sure tried. If she's wild, I want to be rid of that gal too. If she raises a poor calf, and some of you might have seen some of my writings where I advocate that you really don't need to keep records on commercial cow herds. People tell me, well, don't you need the records to know the poor calf? Don't you need to scale, have to weigh them? Well, I never did. You take the poor calves off the day you wean, separate them from the good calves, and your eyeball's close enough. It won't exactly duplicate the scale, but it'll be good enough. And you hold those calves overnight, put them into the mamas again the next morning, and as they mother up, just pair them off. And those cows stayed paired off. They don't get to go back to that herd because you're going to sell them. And then ugly, you can use your definition of ugly. Just be kind of cautious on your definition of ugly. A cow can get pretty good looking if she can just calve every year after year, and raise a decent calf. So we want to be careful of that, but we're going to get rid of those. And then you select the right bull, but be really careful. Moderate size, if you're raising your own replacement heifers, moderate size is big enough, maybe even small. Milk, most ranchers have too much milk in their cow herd and want more. And you just don't need it. Yeah, you need milk, and it needs to be adequate to get a calf started in life and get it up and going. But I call milk anti-maternal after it gets to a certain level. I wish I knew just exactly where that break point is for every environment. I don't. I asked a very, very good breeder who uses a couple of very good indexes, I think, for selection. I asked him where milk became neutral in his selection indexes and when it became negative. And he looked at me and says, nobody's ever asked me that before. But then he told me there was a level that it became neutral, and there was another level a little higher where it became negative. I happen to think he was about 5 to 10 pounds high. I could have been wrong. He could have been wrong. But certainly there comes a point when you don't need any more milk, when you're thinking in terms of the whole ranch profit. Am I getting them pregnant? Am I keeping them at a size where I can run more of them? And then I want excellent cow fertility. And I want that to be sired by that bull. In other words, what are the maternal traits that bull's going to leave? Is he going to leave fertility? And so I look at the care requirement. I get aggravated every spring or early winter when the popular press has articles telling me how to feed bulls to keep them in condition so they can get cows pregnant next year. And I think, if I've got to pamper that bull, he doesn't have to gestate, he doesn't have to lactate. If I have to treat that bull that good so that he can breed cows next year, do I really want his heifer calves to be my replacements? In our operations, our bulls, they're the last thing we fed hay to in the winter. If snow started coming and getting deeper and deeper and tougher, the bulls were the last things that got fed hay. They were fed enough protein so they could convert dry grass or poor quality hay, convert it and make energy out of it to keep them in decent condition. But they were never babied. They were never fed grain. And I just don't think you want to either. If you've got to take very good care of your bulls, you've got to wonder, did those bulls come from a place I want to keep buying bulls, or did were they bred for good longevity? So raise replacement heifer from bulls and cows that fit your environment. Cut inputs and then cull the right cow. So if you do this and then cull the right cow, your cow herd's going to get better. The females, the heifers, are born to cows that are already fairly well selected. The junk has sort of been removed. And think of this, longevity in my mind. Now this is real life longevity. It's not necessarily genetic longevity, but longevity is a result of fertility. Because we sell the opens, we sell the dries, and that's most of what we sell. Yeah, we sell a few others just because they age out, they get bad-eyed, a lame one now and again, a bad udder now and again, but that's a minimal amount of the animals we sell, especially if we'll cull the kind I just mentioned every year and keep our cow herd clean. Still, most of what we sell are open and dry. So if we sell the opens and dries, fertility's the driver of longevity. And fertility, in my mind, is a result of environmental fit. How well do these cattle fit where you are? Now, your production and marketing have to work together. As we moved our cattle calving date to a little later date, it just became a lot easier and a lot better to keep the calves over as yearlings. Now, I'm not going to say that'll work for everyone. I know some people that calve in May and June, and they sell light calves in the fall for big money. And those calves go to winter grazing in the wheat areas, or even to California for winter grass. And they get a huge premium price for those calves doing that. But a lot of people want to keep those late born calves over as yearlings. And that's what I like to do most of the time. So a couple of ideas. After we cut inputs, I want to expose lots of heifers. And I recommend to expose most of them. Almost all the heifer calves born could be exposed. A lot of people say, well, that costs too much money to do that. Let me suggest the opens make good feeders and the pregnant ones make good cows. Short exposure, 24 to 30 days. Now, you probably have to cut the tail off that dog a piece at a time. You probably can't get there all at once. A drought forced us to go to 30 days. I hadn't even thought of it before, but the guys calving heifers, and we calve large groups of heifers, they just loved that short heifer calving season. And the next thing we became aware of is that we got plenty of them pregnant. And so in the opens, like I say, our open heifers were a good profit center for us every year. And so we didn't object to having some open heifers because we knew they weren't as good from a female trait standpoint as the ones that had gotten pregnant. Okay, so then the cows, I want a short calving season and a long breeding season. And you're going to say, what are you talking about? Well, we used to leave the cows with the bulls until preg check time. And that gave us some wonderful marketing opportunities. Now, we did not do that with the heifers. Bulls came out of the heifers at 30 days, and then later on we got down to 24 days. But cows, bulls stayed at the cows till preg check time. It was an easy time to pick them off. Bulls are a lot easier to tend in a cow herd than they are in a bachelor group. And so we had late calving cows. Our late calving cows, and I won't tell you all the market detail unless questions bring it up, but we sold the late calving cows to people that calved in a later season than we did. And we had repeat buyers year after year that bought. Some bought our May calving cows and some bought our June and July calving cows. And if they didn't get pregnant for those dates, we'd put bulls back in them in November because we knew some of those cows were pregnant that we wanted to sell to our previously named buyers. And then we took cows that got pregnant in December. We hauled them to Oklahoma from Nebraska, and they became terminal cross cows there. So we had very, very few open cows by the time we'd get to that kind of a breeding season. And any cow that hadn't calved in the first 30 days, we sold. And within a few years, 87% of them were calving in the first 30 days of the calving season. So adapted cows, calving season management, grazing management have interconnected effects with grazing management, fed feed versus grazed feed, which is economically so important, carrying capacity, which is economically so important, labor and facilities, you just don't need as much labor or facilities. Overhead's the same, you don't need as much. And herd fertility, which is a huge driver of profitability. So they just are wonderful in what they will do. And your results are, when you get to the end of this, you've got an appropriate sized cow, typically smaller, with an increase in stocking rate. You then also have profitable open heifers. They don't have to cost you money. They shouldn't cost you money. I hear occasionally that a cow has to have 5 calves before she'll break even. Let me tell you, if you have to have a cow for 5 years before she breaks even, I can guarantee you're not making money ever. It's just costing you too much. Your operations are not profitable. Every female you should sell should, except the only one is the one that you preg checked and thought she was pregnant and she comes up dry. Somebody else is going to have to compensate for her because she's the money loser. But if she's pregnant and delivers a calf, let's say you've got a pregnant yearling heifer and she calves at 2 and she weans a calf at 2 years old, nearly 3 by the time she weans it, but she now preg checks open. The sale of that heifer, selling at a heiferette value, and her heifer calf should pay her lifetime operating costs. If they don't, something is wrong. Okay, less fed feed and more grazing are the results of selecting heifers correctly. Gives you drought planning flexibility by keeping all these yearling heifers. There comes that odd year when you can't keep them all. But if you can breed and preg check early, that lets you sell a little earlier. Sometimes you just have to make the best pick you can and say, well, we better sell some of them because we don't have room to keep them. Or you can go sell a bunch of cows and keep the heifers and put them in place of the cows that you sold. And maybe that was a net positive for your cash flow by doing that. And it also gives you market opportunity for bred cows, all of which yields to increased profitability. Okay, I think that's what I have to say today, unless there are questions.
And there are. Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's get started on these questions. Daryl is asking about your opinion relative to, I suppose we'll have to use an EPD equivalent, but your opinion relative to appropriate level of milk.
Most people have taken their stuff and they always either compare it to or have adopted an Angus basis for that. And I really wish I knew. My opinion is that for most of the areas where I have worked, someplace between 15 and 20 EPD for milk is adequate, and I think most profitable. But I'm guessing. It's kind of casual observation. It's an observation that's hard to target as well as I would like to be able to. So I gotta admit, there's a fair amount of guess in that. Having said that, I probably wouldn't be afraid to go a little lower and maybe as much as 5 pounds higher. But that just kind of feels good to me. I'm quite convinced that 30 plus is too much. I've had a lot of people come talk to me about, hey, our cows used to breed in the 90s all the time. Now we're having trouble to get them to even breed in the 80s. They're talking about percentage of pregnancy. And when I quiz them a little, you get to the end of the row, what it says, we've got cows now that are too big, give too much milk and don't have any heterosis. And I think the too much milk is a good part of that. And so anyway, I wish I could be more sure in my answer. Not as sure as I'd like to be.
That's a tough one. We have a long-term experiment we've initiated here. We're just really excited to get into that and hopefully have a little more information in the future on that topic, Burke. So secondly, tied to that, it's not part of Daryl's question, but I'll just add to it while we're on the subject. How about guidance on your opinion relative to mature cow size? If you're talking about central western Oklahoma, you have experience here in Oklahoma, where would you land on that?
This becomes as much a marketing question as it is a genetic question. I think cow-calf efficiency, we can't hardly get them small enough because of relative intakes in relationship to body size and then calf size in relationship to cow size and those sorts of things. But I think you get too small and then your calf is unacceptable in the marketplace. Unless you're happening to break into the grass-fed deal, and some of those seem to work okay with smaller cattle. But I don't know. Practically, I'm thinking 1050 to 12. That's a pretty broad range, but someplace in there. And and then are we talking about a cow that's just weaned a calf in the fall when you typically preg check, and if you weigh, that's typically the time you weigh and sell your open cows, or are you talking about a dry cow next spring? And there'll be 200 pounds difference in those. And, so I gave 150 pound range. And I think if you can work someplace in there, that to me, that feels pretty good to take into account, get them as small as you can, but still have something you can sell and will be acceptable in the marketplace.
An interesting observation. We'll move on. These questions are adding up quick, but one thing I've noticed, Burke, and you mentioned it today, it's the first time I've heard you say it, but the more intensive the management system, intensive grazing management system, it seems to me like, the more moderate cows are more appropriate and lower the milk. Because, if you more uniformly graze the pasture, you're basically reducing their ability to select the higher quality forage. And so you've got an animal that has to deal with a lower quality diet on average. And so I think those two things are tied together.
I think you're exactly right. And the first carrying capacity increase that doesn't come from growing more feed. It comes from the very fact that you just mentioned. You're grazing more uniformly, so it comes from increased utilization, which means a higher percentage of the plants are getting bitten and used. And hopefully you don't overuse. You want to trample some, and you want to get off before they're pulled down too far. But yeah, so the first comes through improved utilization, and then later on the biology kicks in, and you start to grow more feed too. But Yeah, those smaller cows just seem to function better in that kind of an environment.
All right, next question. How did you market the open heifers? Did you retain for a while or sell immediately?
Well, by the time we preg checked them, it was just about the right time to be marketing a good feeder yearling. Uh, we were set up for April calving, and we tried to calve the heifers about the same time as the cows, maybe just a little earlier, because sometimes we AI'd them. And our seed stock manager AI'd his seed stock herd. We bull bred everything else, but he produced the bulls for the rest of us. But he was our best AI guy, and we had him retrain our techs, our on ranch techs, every year prior to breeding yearlings. So we'd breed yearlings maybe 5 or 6 days ahead of the cows, just because of that. But essentially calved at the same time, and so by the time we could preg check those, we were getting into late August, early September, and that's when you want to sell a yearling out of the sandhills. We learned over time that you're wasting feed unless you want to supplement protein pretty good. Those yearlings are going to quit gaining by the time you get into September. I don't know what you'll find in Oklahoma, but I think not enough people weigh these yearlings and get an idea of their growth rate late term. But our yearlings wouldn't gain unless we were throwing pretty good protein at them as they got beyond mid-August, and certainly by the 1st of September. So we kind of sold them about as quick as we pregged them open.
Okay. All right, 2 related questions. I'll mention these and you can answer both if you like. First of all, Daryl asks, do you recommend a good mineral program? You know, it's an expensive component, but seems necessary and related to that question. Gary says, what is your opinion of using multimin vitamin on your heifers prior to turning with the bulls? Is it necessary?
Never used multi-min. I know some people speak pretty well of it, so I don't want to say one way or another on the multi-min. I'm a believer in minerals, but I don't know what constitutes a good mineral program. This is complex, and I've visited with some people that I regard as about as good in mineral nutrition as the researchers get, and they just admit it's really tough, because when you've got one mineral that can tie up another, one mineral that can liberate another, and mineral and vitamins that can sort of substitute a little bit for each other, how do you design the optimum mix of minerals? And I just think it's really, really tough. I'm a believer in them for performance reasons that I have seen personally. Hay intake, for example, when I had no choice but to full feed cows on hay because of snow depth. And when I offered mineral, why the consumption of hay diminished significantly without the body condition dropping. And so that sort of made a believer in me of minerals. But I guess I'm to the point that I just try to go to a nutritionist that understands my area as well as I think anyone could understand it, for deficiencies and maybe even excesses that might cause toxicity problems, etc., and have them design what they think is the best mineral.
Yeah,
and then I'll be honest, I'm cheap. No, I'm not cheap. I'm tight. I've generally cut their recommended consumption in half, and that's because I was trained as an economist, and I know the first unit of input does you more good than the second more good than the third, and the third more good than the fourth, and I've just cut it in half. And I've never felt like I was hurting myself by, if they wanted 4 ounces a day, I fed 2, and I've never felt like that hurt. And the way I controlled it, because the way minerals work, they last a while in the body and in the liver, and so I just put out, say I picked the day of the week, but say Monday morning I put out 2 ounces per head for 7 days.
Okay.
If it was gone by Thursday, they didn't get any more till next Monday.
Okay. That's good.
So I did that, and and I again, I'm guessing a little. I don't think it ever hurt us, but I wish I were a lot smarter, and I wish there were other people a lot smarter on minerals. I think it is really problematic. Fred Provenza would indicate that the animals have an ability to select, and I've got a lot of confidence in Fred, and he did probably more work on that in that arena than anybody else. He didn't do it with minerals; he did it with other things. But,
All right. How often or after how many calving seasons are you replacing a cow?
We got the calving season down to 30 days. And so we sold anything that hadn't, well, some calved in March, but anything that hadn't calved by the last day of April, we segregated those off and bred them to calve, in May. And then when we preg checked in the fall, we said, hey, if she's going to be a June or July calver, we got a market for those. The ones we bred for May, we had a buyer that came and bought them off the preg shoot that fall. If they were pregnant again, having been bred for May, he would buy them. And anyway, so, a lot of times those cows, because minimal heifer development, they weren't huge yet they were small at 2, and at 3, they weren't huge. By 4, they'd kind of got to their mature size. So it seemed like in those years, 2 and 3 and 4, we'd be having some open cows. Boy, 5 to 8, we didn't hardly have very many open cows, but if we did, they were sold. But we did have some of those later calvers in those age groups, so they were sold. But we didn't sell very many of the old cows. We let them. We had a grandma herd, and we let them get old, and that thing kind of affected our turnover because we could sell all the rest of the cows at a nice premium from the other herds if they were late calvers and got pregnant. We'd sell them at a premium. But in the grandma herd, we didn't sell them at a premium, except for sort of sold them at a premium. We'd go into those cows in August. Remember April calving? We'd go in August and we'd take off inferior pairs. Calf's not doing very good. Mama's probably going to not be any better next year than this year because she's already a grandma cow. And, if her udder was starting to go, if her body condition was starting to go, any sign of lameness, any sign of eye problem, we just talked any questionable pairs. We sorted away from that grandma herd. And we looked at them again more closely again at preg check time. But for now, we took them off in August, took those pairs. We put them by themselves for a day or two, and then we fence line weaned them. And then we'd cake the calf with the days that they were together, we caked the calf with the cow so that we could cake that calf on the ground. We found that caking the calf on the ground, it'd do about as good as the calves that were left on the mothers, just out grazing. And so we could sell those cows. Now it just happened we had a buyer that worked with us on those. He said, hey, there's guys that feed cows better than you guys do. And if those cows are pregnant, they'll buy them. And I said, they're not pregnant. I can't guarantee them pregnant. I can just guarantee them exposed. He paid $100 over weigh up for quite a few years. In other words, and he hauled them away. So we weighed them across our scale, took the sale barn weigh up price and added $100 to it. And that's what he paid them for. So that's how we got rid of them. So it's, tie marketing in with whatever you're doing in production, because they're really wonderful marketing opportunities.
Very good. Okay, so please help distinguish between cow size and herd size.
Herd size is how many cows do you have there? And cow size is how big is the individual cow. And so, naturally, if you boil that down to AUs, in other words, one AU being 1,000-pound cow, as the cow size decreases and I run more cows in terms of AUs, it might not be any bigger initially. But it probably is a little bigger because the calves are going to be bigger proportionally in relationship to the smaller cow size than if the cow was bigger. But that's the main distinguishing thing. When I'm talking about herd size, I'm talking about the number of cows out there in the herd. When I'm talking about cow size, I'm talking about the individual cow size.
Okay. It's getting close to 1:30. Folks, I just, before some of you have to leave, I want to just tell you how much we appreciate you joining us here today. We're going to continue answering these questions. If you can stay, please do. But obviously, we certainly understand if you can't hang around. So, Burke, our next question is: smaller operations usually have to sell all of their steers and most heifers, except only the observed best replacements. We usually keep back heifer calves born in the first half of the calving season and then make our first cull decision with pelvic measurements and an initial reproductive tract score. Is that a practical approach?
That's a better approach than what a lot of people use. When we exposed all of the heifers, we found out that the ones that were born earliest got pregnant at a higher rate than the ones that were born later. So you're using some practicality there, but you still have some of those that were born early won't breed, and some of those that were born late will. We learned that, and so I think it's a better approach. I guess I would argue a little bit with the fact that you have to sell most of the heifer calves. I don't think you have to. If you want, maybe you have to move this a little bit at a time, but I think you can get to where you're keeping the heifer calves. Again, move it a little bit at a time, and you sell bred cows off the other end. But truly, if you're a small rancher, especially if you're working from a day job, you'll make life a lot simpler if you just buy replacement cows and terminal cross. But you can work into that where you're keeping most of the calves, but you've got to sell bred cows to compensate for that. And there are people out there that'll buy bred cows, and there's always somebody calving a little later than you are. So use that as a way to pull up your calving season, to shorten it up. So it's the later calving cows that you want to sell. But yeah, that's a better method. If you've got to do something now to make some decision on which heifers are better, and I tell you, that is a challenge. We did some statistical work with Colorado State University many years ago with two heifer calf crops, entire calf crops out of several herds. And we measured everything we could measure on these, and the highest R squared we got when we correlated that or regressed it against the next 2 years of conception, 3 years, yearling, 2-year-old, 3-year-old conception, and the weaning weights of the first two calves, the highest R squared we got in any combination of variables that we could measure going in was 0.14. That's when I threw my hands in the air and said, hey, we're going to let the bulls and Mother Nature select the heifers from now on. And, so I think we end up guessing a lot more than we think we're guessing, but I'd probably do it the same way, though. If you've got to cut the number in half or whatever, why, I'd probably go for the ones that were born the earliest. I might look at a tract score and run from there.
All right.
The next thing is, don't buy bulls that are undoing what you're trying to do with your heifer selection program.
Good point. All right, Burke, you manage ranches across the U.S. This is from Jeff. Would you agree that the mineral question is based on environment? Any thoughts on mineral programs in Florida versus Oklahoma versus Wyoming?
Well, I never managed in Florida. And so as a result, I've been there quite a bit. And I used to work with the manager down there quite a lot on some joint projects. But I didn't really dig into what their mineral program was, so probably should not speak to that. But I've had quite a bit of experience in Missouri and some consulting work in eastern Nebraska. Western Nebraska, I pulled phosphorus clear out of the mineral, for example. And I do in Wyoming. Don't put any in. Don't put any iron in any of those places. In eastern Nebraska, they had pulled, before I got to them, they had pulled phosphorus out of their mineral mix, and they lost conception rate. And when they put it back in, the conception rate came back. So I do think there are geographical differences for mineral. And I know there's areas that are low in selenium and areas that are too high in selenium.
Yep.
And so you've got to adjust selenium for those, or you can have various and sundry problems. So I think you have to tailor mineral as close as the best expert you can find knows how to your area. I'm pretty much a believer in that. And I still think we're not at optimum when we do that, but it's as good as we can do with what we know.
Outstanding. Well, Burke, thank you again. As Dr. Biggs has mentioned here, the recording of this session today. It'll take us, it'll either be available late Friday, tomorrow, or it will be available on Monday this coming week. But you can get to that at beep.okstate.edu. And all of these are available there. So Burke, thank you so much. We value your time and your input here.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
We just really appreciate it. We had a great turnout here today. Dr. Biggs, would you close us out and maybe tell folks who we can look forward to in the topic for next week?
Absolutely. Dr. Richard Prather of Shattuck, Oklahoma, will be visiting with us. He's got some really great information and kind of ongoing studies in his practice with reproductive tract scoring, and really one of the leaders in that area. So Dr. Prather, of course, is an Oklahoma State grad, a proud College of Veterinary Medicine grad, and he was kind enough to join us today. So we're going to do a little test run with him after we close out today, make sure everything's ready to go for next week. And with that, we want to make sure we thank all of our extension personnel that make this happen, both in front of the scenes and behind the scenes, as well as thank Dr. Doy. She is our extension leader here with us. She's with us today, as well as Dr. Rusk, Animal Science Department Head. So with that, thank you, everyone. Dr. Lallman, if you have any other comments, or Dr. Beck, we would turn it over to you. And we will see everyone next week.
Thank you very much, Burke.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.